Alright, so we have one video done on tailing with synthetics. Again, this is very fundamental stuff. Now we're going to talk about tailing with natural materials. And there are many different types of tailing you can do with natural materials. Please remember, this is only about how to tail, not how to tie an exact fly. I watched a video I made with synthetics, and I did happen to notice I would refer a couple of times to the thread in this position being over the point of the hook. It should be the barb of the hook. Hopefully you realize that. Alright, so the first type of tailing material I'm going to tie on is going to be tailing material from a soft hackle. A wet fly feather, if you will, or some kind of game bird like a partridge or a snipe or something like that. Now, what I do is, you can see I've already worked on one side of this. The first thing I like to do is even out the tips. Once I have the tips even, I grab a small clump and I just trim them back. I don't like to get too much of this at a time. Now the next step is kind of fancy here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to fold them into each other so that on either side I keep the shiny or more colorful side out. The inside is dull. I should have shown you that. See, here's the inside, it's kind of dull in color, and here's the outside. I want to fold them so the outside is all the way around, which I did do. Okay? And then, wet fly hackle is very easy to work with. I move up a couple turns. I don't ever want to tie it in at the exact point like right there, so I tie it in a little bit ahead of it, and I was very careful to not put any pressure until I pull straight down. Putting that pressure straight down with one loop over it at first. I should do that again. Watch. I take a loop over, and only with the second loop do I pull, and it doesn't have any effect of putting torque on that clump. Now I'm going to go back to my original tying point over the barb. That's one more turn, and I take that turn loosely. Alright, I don't want to put a lot of pressure on that turn. Nice and loose. Then when I come forward, I start to crank down on it. The reason is because when you put a lot of pressure on that last turn into the materials, it can often splay them out and force them out. And I don't know that that really makes any difference to the fish, but in my mind, for producing a nice, neat fly, it's an effect you don't want. So, there you go. That's how you put soft hackle feathers on. One more time. Loose loop. Loose over the top. Pull straight down. That'll tighten it up. You should be a couple of turns forward. Back to the tie-in point. Don't go as hard as you can. Now as you go forward, start to crank it down. And that, folks, is how you tie soft hackle tails in. Alright, so we got that done. And now we're going to talk about dry fly tailing as opposed to wet fly tailing. Now, a lot of times we split tails. And if we're going to split tails, I like to use microfibbits. I don't like to use hackle for splitting tails. But here is a product called Whiting Coq de Leon feathers, and they make fantastic tailing feathers. Whiting makes, without a doubt, the best dry fly hackle in the world. However, getting the larger sizes is not Whiting's forte. They have, you're going to use 98% of the hackle you're going to use, or 95% is between size 12 and size 22. Nothing comes close. They have some really good size 10 stuff, but you got to look for it. Once you start hitting size 8 and bigger, it's not Whiting's forte with their typical line of Whiting hackles, and that's where you can look for the Coq de Leon feathers, or you can try to find feathers that have longer fibers like this, and those are also excellent feathers for tailing. So again, just like before, when I'm going to tail with fibers for dry flies, I also stroke the feathers up perpendicular to the stem. And then what I like to do is go out by the tips and pull them all in and trim. I like to look at them once and see if there are any that seem to be way out of the way. I don't see any. Now, I manipulate it with my fingers so I get a nice tight bunch, and I'm going to do the same practice I had before. Notice, here's the end of my thread. I come forward a little bit of the end of that thread. Normally I would measure a tail to be the length of the body. First loop over is loose, second loop over, pulls down, and you see how that tail stays in a nice thick, a nice tight bunch like that? That's really the effect that you're looking to make. Working your way back. I am putting pressure on this now, and when I get to the barb of the hook, I know that after the barb of the hook, the shank is going to start to bend. So this turn being over the barb of the hook is a little bit looser. Second turn was, and I'm changing direction, and now as I go forward, I'm starting to tighten up. And I think you can see those really nice tightly stacked fibers for the dry fly tail, just like that. Again, if you want to get good tailing material, Coq de Leon feathers are the way to go. They're excellent, excellent tailing materials. And the other thing I like about them, and I purposely chose the color I did, the Coq de Leon feathers come in a million colors. I chose the color I did because I knew it would go up against my shirt and stand out, so, or my fleece here, and stand out. So excellent material. I would strongly recommend that for tailing purposes you pick up a couple of different sizes, or colors I should say. The sizes are all going to be big. Alright, so that's the second type of material. So we have soft hackle with feathers, we have dry fly with feathers. The next thing I'm going to talk to you about is the times when we use deer hair for tailing materials. And that tends to be on more bushy dry flies like wolf dry flies and so on and so forth. So I have a piece of, I believe this is moose right here, and I'm going to just get some of the pieces together. I'll trim this for now. I really don't know how it's all going to look. Now, first off, you should stack it so that it all comes together. I have a nice little stacker here. Great stacker made by Jay Smits, who makes the J vise that I have, that I tie with, which is a fantastic vise. Best vise I've ever used. Okay, tap it. And there we go. Now, one thing about hairs is, I remember when I first started tying, I would tie them in and then I would trim them off. You should trim first. So I like my tail to go all the way up to just about the eye of the hook. Length of the body out in the back. And it's that same idea of going over once loose, okay? Going over a second time, and that second one I'm going to pull down. Now you notice with deer hair it's very exaggerated. As soon as you pull down, you flare it up. So we have to keep that in mind. I want to build a tough, durable fly. So I am using force here, up and down, not circular torque force, because if I go circular, look what it does to the fibers. It pulls them over the hook shank. So I go right down here and I pull down. Now I'm just about at the point of the barb, so I take a loose turn, and look at how those fibers all got pulled in there. Okay, let me go over that again. When I get near to the point where I'm above the barb of the hook, that means that after, if I go further, watch, if I go past the barb, look what happens to the tail. See how it goes down like that? We don't want the tail to go down like that. So I'm going to go with loose turns here. There is very little thread pressure on here. I'm going to go forward a little bit, and now I tighten down. And if you see, that keeps that tail in a nice tight bunch. So it's the same thing with dry fly hackle and with deer hair tailing. It's just going to be a more pronounced effect on the deer hair tailing. Okay? Alright, so we've come across all of these, which are all for dry flies. And there's one more, two more types of tailing that I have to put on. And they tend to be used more with streamers or saltwater stuff. And for that, I really ought to have a little bit of a bigger hook. So I've taken out a size 4 saltwater hook. And I will, this is size 8/0 thread. Typically I would have a stronger, a thicker thread. But we'll go with this for now, because all I'm doing is showing you how to tie them with tailing. Next step, bucktail. First off, some things you should know about bucktail. This is the actual by the body where the tail begins. This is the point of the tail. Materials at this end of the tail are not going to flare very much at all. Materials at this end will flare a bunch. So I'm going to pick something in the middle to work with. for the sake of teaching. And I'm going to clip off a clump as so. And I don't use a deer hair stacker on deer tails. What I do is I'll pluck the longest feathers. It's basically a process of 3 steps. I take the longest ones and I pull them out, and then I put them back in again, making them even more or less with the previous ones. Then I come in here and I grab the longest fibers and I pull out the shortest fibers, and I just get rid of those. And there is more or less an evenly spaced bucktail, and that works fine. I'm not going to put it on like I would a real long normal tail. So I'm just going to tie in the tail and see how it goes. Again, I like, whenever I tie with bucktail, I like the fibers to go all the way up to the eye of the hook. And that way I build my body on top of it. Okay. Tying it in. I then use, it's so important to understand the role of this hand, your right hand. I gather the material, I pull it tight, I rest it on top of my vise over here, and then I just work my way. I don't bother going too tight yet. I work my way down the shank until I get to the barb. And these last couple of turns of the barb, you should be thinking what I'm thinking already, not too tight. Then I go forward, and now I start tightening it down. And you can see that other than this one little 8th grader here, 8th grader I call them because they don't do what they're supposed to do, I now have my deer hair tied out the back of the fly. And there's my tail of deer hair. Again, it's the same process all over again. I can't emphasize enough how the last couple of turns right here, you don't want to crank down on it because it will tend to flare it. And you don't want to use torque. Remember, if you use torque, which is circular force, if you use torque here, look what it does to the tail. It brings it over the hook shank. So you want to avoid torque. You want your pressure to be no pressure, no pressure, no pressure, straight down. No pressure, straight in. No pressure, straight up. No pressure, straight down. So you can go 90 degrees to the hook shank. Vertical, horizontal, in, out, doesn't make a difference, up, down. What you don't want is full pressure all the way through. Now that's true when you're at the tie-in point of the materials. Once the material's secured in and you're going forward on the shank, then you can crank. You can do full thread torque all the way around. Alright, so that's putting in a bucktail tail. And the last thing I want to do is show you how to put a couple of feathers in case you want to make a feather tail. Something like a deceiver or various streamers. So I just plucked a couple of coq de leon feathers, or coq de leon, however you properly say it. And you can splay them where they spread apart. My friend Bill Cox likes to do that. Or you can have them face each other. If you splay them, that's the old classic tarpon style. And if you have them face each other like this, it's the more the traditional streamer style that you might get. My buddy John Pecorum, he loves to tie Lou Oatman style patterns. Okay, so here we go. I get them back to back and I strip off. I get to a point where there's a nice tying material, then I strip off a bunch of the fibers, and because there's a small window that the camera's recording here, I'm going to clip my hackle stems short. Now this is really the only thing I want to show you. When I tie in these materials, and usually, in all honesty, it's more of a wing up top, you want this is very difficult to see, but you want these stems to be next to each other. You don't want them to cross each other, otherwise that'll lead to problems. So again, no pressure, pull straight down, no pressure, pull straight down, work my way back. Look, they're already laying in exactly the right place. When you see fast fly tyers, it's because they know how to do this through trial and error. And then I work my way forward. Now, ordinarily, I would make these stems go all the way past the eye of the hook, and I literally do mean past. And then what I like to do, I like my flies to be as close to indestructible as possible. I take my scissors and I fold these guys back. And then I come back over them like that. Now, I wouldn't do this in the middle of the shank because I create a bump like I just showed you here. But I would do it all the way up by the eye of the hook and then fold it back and then have that bump right where the fly ends anyway. And if I'm doing a shadow box, I don't care about this step. And I wouldn't do it because it would create the possibility of a little bump in the body. But if I'm tying a fly to fish, you can bet I'm going to do it, because notice it didn't pull out. I broke the feathers, but I did not pull them out. And when you lock that guy in just like that, those feathers are going nowhere. All right, there's tailing 101 with natural materials for you. Fly tying fundamentals.